I think it's fair to say that the Brendan Kavanagh incident, let's call it, with the group of Chinese nationals has gone viral. He's had several interviews, there's been numerous videos about this. The top videos are now in the millions of views. And it's been featured on Talk TV, it's been featured on, I believe, GB News. And it's a big talking point. I've got a few different newspapers today. I don't know if I haven't had a chance to look at it properly, so I don't know if it's been covered in those. I imagine it would be in some of the London papers, I would have thought. Um, but, it really does bring about a lot of questions and a lot of implications. But I don't mean the specific incident brings implications, but I mean what it means more broadly has implications, namely CCP influence in this country. I think it's a very, very serious matter. There's people making jokes out of it and looking at it in a more trivial way, but I actually think it's a little bit sinister. One of the most troubling aspects, like I said, I'm not just going to repeat everything I said in that video, but certainly the aspect of police involvement makes me wonder, is the CCP, if you don't know what I'm referring to here, that's Chinese Communist Party, are they utilising British police forces against us? I mean, there are other examples where this seems to be a plausible thing. The situation with Drew Pavlo, the activist, human rights activist, is an Australian, when he was falsely accused of making bomb threats against the Chinese embassy. Now, again, I know the Met has to take that seriously, but it should have been abundantly clear that it was a smear campaign against him. And, they had no evidence for it. They should have just checked the IP address and realised it hadn't come from his account. But, they dragged that out. In this case, you had a British Transport Police policewoman harassing this man. I would call it harassment, really saying, oh, you can't say that, can you? And actually he can. I think one of the problems with policing in Britain today is there's a common sense deficit. Quite frankly, too many police officers lack common sense. They seem to think that there are things that people cannot do that actually they can. So frankly, there's a lot of police officers that would do well to know the law, to really know that actually we have no jurisdiction to tell people what they can and can't say. I think the only time it should be a police matter is if there is clear threats of violence. And even then it should be clear cut. It shouldn't be someone making a, joke in bad taste or something. But in those cases, then yeah, definitely the police should act, because you have the other situation where there is acts of violence and people say, well, why was no action taken? But I think the situation is very, very skewed. Now, this is for another video, so I'm just going to briefly touch on it. But look at the attack on, we've had so many, the Nottingham attack last year. The offender responsible to just being, he's been charged with manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. The case with Sir David Amos, his daughter is now suing the police for not looking at the warning signs. So there's too many examples of dangerous offenders who have, then went on to commit violent acts because signs weren't read. A few days ago in Norfolk, there was what appears to be a murder-suicide. A man, his wife and 2 children all died by stab wounds. It's likely a murder-suicide. Now, there were reports to the police for something to be done, and they did not take action. A disgrace. They've referred themselves to the watchdog, but this is happening too many times. So I think for the police, there's a real balancing act. I get that. But I strongly, strongly question where their priorities lie. Why is it that the British Transport Police take it on themselves to, badger a man who's doing something completely lawful? I mean, it makes you wonder, are they pandering to, this is why I mentioned implications, are they pandering to the sensitivities of foreign nationals? Because they shouldn't be. The only time they should be getting involved is if the foreign national has complained that they're a victim of crime, like they've had something stolen, or they've been assaulted, or they've suffered actual racist abuse. I'm not talking about a man saying, this is not China. That's not racist abuse. Now, if he'd said to them, let's say he was some drunk football lout and he came up and got in their face and said, go back to China or something like that, then yes, it would be a police matter. That would be harassment. But he was minding his own business. And it's very, very important that people know the facts here, because the latest on this is that this obnoxious group are now trying to smear him. Apparently, there's a campaign in the Chinese cyberspace to say that he's some sort of thug, that he touched the young woman, and they're trying to portray him in this light. That's why it's so important that this remains a news item, and people like myself and anyone else who wants to support him, set the record straight. Those of us who saw the original video can see the context. You know, if anything, I find it remarkable how calm he was. I mean, honestly, if I had a guy yelling in my face, I can't guarantee I would be very diplomatic. I'm someone who tends to fight fire with fire, so, I think he'd probably done the right thing staying calm. But honestly, if I have a young uh, guy yelling in my face, I wouldn't take it lightly. I'd say, right, pal, back off right now. Or, I actually think Dr. K should have got the police himself and said, officer, this young man's threatening me. Um, but in terms of the implications, what are we looking at? We're looking at a group of people who all the information seems to point to, in all likelihood, they are CCP members. Um, and they're basically making demands of a British citizen in his capital city doing something completely lawful. This is a disgrace. And I think broadly, you know, I think basically the Chinese state sees us as a soft touch. And I think certainly the utilization of the race card is a technique they would use because it taps into Western sensitivities. The West is generally far more sensitive about race than Asian countries are. It's not to say that it's not an issue at all over there, but basically the Chinese, they're not PC about that at all. If you go to China, it's quite racist, definitely towards people of darker skin. Not towards white people necessarily, but they're just race just isn't a taboo issue in the same way. So it's curious when Chinese nationals come to the West and they then use the race card. It's almost like they know it's a sensitive issue in the West, so they're using it against us. I think that's what's happening. Now, he didn't say anything racist, and that is very, very important to clarify. I do not accept that saying this is not China or you're holding Chinese flags, that is not racist. It's just pointing out the obvious. Um, Now, if he'd lost his temper and said, if you don't like it here, go back to China, I don't even think that would be racist, quite frankly. But there's people on the reactionary left who would say, I've heard a few people saying he was a gammon, which itself is a racist slur. But useful idiots, useful idiots. Anybody blaming him is a useful idiot, and they really don't understand how the Chinese Communist Party works. Um, but I just find it troubling that you have this infiltration. And this is far from the only example. I think things like this will happen more and more. I've cited a few cases. I cited Drew Pavlo, who's an Australian human rights activist, big CCP critic. He's been targeted by the 50 Cent Army. There was a case in Birmingham, Kong Lin Lin, who was, a journalist, so-called, with CCTV, and she got into a nationalistic tirade against Benedict Rogers, who I don't know the guy very well, but I'm connected to him. He's a human rights activist. He's a member of the Conservative Party, and she got into a nationalistic tirade against him, calling him a liar and basically spouting off about pro-China, a pro-China rant. And she also assaulted a young volunteer there. Now, she should have been arrested. I think she was escorted from the building, but she should have immediately had her press credentials cancelled. She should have been arrested. There should have been an official complaint made to the Chinese embassy. None of that happened. I think she was arrested and that was about it. But she should have been deported. There's things like this that raise questions. Last year, the Manchester Consulate, there was Hong Kong protesters outside, but there was some shady characters who dragged some of them in, trying to imply that they were being attacked to make themselves look like the victim. The CCP is very good at these manipulative tactics. That should have warranted summons by the Foreign Office of the Chinese ambassador. Now, Dominic Raab in his time as foreign secretary, I think he was quite good. He was quite on board with this. James Cleverly, I'm less impressed by. He is cautious. He's just overly cautious with China. I think when it comes to China, I accept that you can't just cut off connections. I accept that, it's the world's second biggest economy. We do need to communicate with them on issues like climate change and technology. Those areas that we need to talk to them on. But we should not see China as a friend. The David Cameron era, and this is, why I've got question marks over Sunak's appointment of Cameron. David Cameron is far too cosy with China, not just during his time as Prime Minister and as Chancellor George Osborne, but subsequently his business dealings with China. I question Jeremy Hunt. Now, Jeremy Hunt has a Chinese wife, and I'm always a bit cautious about getting into, I think it's low politics to attack a politician's family. But honestly, we're in a situation right now where I think high-profile mainland Chinese nationals living in the UK, I think it's fair that they come under some degree of scrutiny. I'm not saying it should be a witch hunt, and I'm not saying every single person of Chinese descent should sort of come under suspicion. But I certainly think mainland Chinese, I think that we need to just get a backbone and say, when you're in this country, you respect this country, you cannot make demands. Now, if someone's filming in a public place, they have every right to do that, and you've got no right to make demands of them. If you don't want to be in the film, then move out of the frame, move to another part of the station. It's disgusting that they're trying to smear this man. And like I say, he comes across well. He's calm. He's even said in his last video he wants to shake hands with them and just put an end to this. But they don't want it. They're now smearing him as a thug, as some sort of racist. It's a disgusting character attack. And I really think, I stand with him 100%. If I was in London, I'd be going to St Pancras Station. Apparently someone's organised a sort of solidarity thing for him. I would do it. I would go. But, this country, and by this country I'm talking about the government and our institutions, needs to get a backbone, really. I mean, Rishi Sunak's government has been taking a hard line with Russia. I think one of his finer moments as Prime Minister was his recent speech to the Parliament in Kyiv. I give him credit for that. I think he's on the right side of history. But when it comes to China, I'm afraid I can't say the same thing. The only Prime Minister in recent years who's shown a real willingness to stand up to China, it has to be said, is Liz Truss. Yeah, our short-serving PM. She's the only one who's been consistently tough with China. And that has to count for something, she's not going to go down as a great Prime Minister, obviously, but we need to wake up to what's going on here. We need to understand that what the CCP does is they use soft power. So, for example, tertiary education. I think that British university departments, it's not enough to say they're keeping within the law. Frankly, they need to show their loyalty to this country. If they are investing in joint partnership programs with Chinese universities, they need to establish, do these universities, what connections do they have to the state, to military complexes? If they're sharing information on physics, it may seem harmless, but what information is being used in the military sector? Things like that. It's not enough to say, oh, but we're obeying the law. I think these universities, departments, I think some of them are basically going out of their way for Chinese money, to the extent where they'll turn a blind eye to the behaviour of Chinese nationalistic students who are bullying and threatening dissidents, Hong Kongers, for example, and CCP critics. And, of course, I would say, no one should be bullied, but frankly, the bullying is mainly from them. I'm not suggesting that Chinese nationals should, it should kind of turn around. But really, if there's evidence of that, then the individuals responsible should lose their student visa. They should be expelled. And if they have, engaged in violent threats or they've assaulted someone, they should face criminal charges for that. So why the hell is this country such a soft touch when it comes to China? I don't want to think that it's just fear, it's just cowardice of standing up to the world's second biggest economy. But we have to remember something about China. It's a powerful country. But we shouldn't assume that it's all powerful. There may be some of this that is a bit of a paper dragon, in the sense that, their economy is shaky, their military is huge, but a lot of the equipment is not that modern. And, manpower alone isn't enough. I think sometimes we give China too much credit in terms of its influence. And, the fact that Western leaders congratulated William Lai in becoming president of Taiwan and didn't really care what China said about it, that's a good thing. So it shows that we can actually stand up for our principles, and China can, shout about it and scream and make demands, but we need to send out the message that that sort of wolf warrior fuggery, we won't just tolerate it. I think it's important that there are joint exercises in the Taiwan Strait to sort of send out a message to China that they can't just make threats of World War III. They can't just threaten to violently invade Taiwan because they don't like the self-determination of the people there. But getting closer to home, I think if there are any Confucius Institutes still in operation, there's just too many question marks around them. They may sound innocent on the surface, but they cannot be trusted. I think that we need this, Sunak needs to publicly state that we will not tolerate any use of black prisons or underhand methods like that. Of course, the Chinese side will deny it, but we have to say to them that we're just not going to tolerate this. And I think the government is still far too cautious when it comes to China. Um, and I think the police are spineless when it comes to China. I accept that there's certain situations, for example, people who have diplomatic status cannot be searched, for example, but the government can have a backbone and speak out and say that, when they are in this country, they're expected to respect this country, because it's not even, the situation for Westerners over there, there's absolutely no leeway for speaking out. When I was over there, I had to watch what I said all the time, really, um, because I could have found myself in very hot water. I did actually get a threat once. It actually was a mother of one of my former students, and she saw that I put online, I was testing the water a little bit. Now, I didn't criticize the government, but I did say, sometimes I wish I could say what I really want to say, but I have to be careful on the Chinese internet. And I was sort of testing the water. I wasn't openly criticizing the government, but I was sort of testing their grounds. Well, she threatened me. She wanted to know what school I was in. She wanted to report me, claim that I was a Western spy, and all sorts of rubbish. Um, so, that was minor compared to what some people have went through, but wasn't pleasant, to get a stranger threatening you when you're in their country. There was, a stranger I didn't know her well. All my interactions with her were online. But basically, we need to send out a message to these CCP thugs that they can't just get their own way all the time, and they cannot use racism as a go-to. I will say, though, the British left, this is one of those areas, they will endorse that. They will take the view that if you say this is not China, that's a racist statement. It absolutely is not. It absolutely is not. And I even would argue that saying, if you don't like it here, go back to China, I don't think that's a racist statement. Now, making sort of racial slurs would be, but this is a very important point because, like I say, they're using it against us. They're using our tolerance, frankly, against us. I think for too damn long, the West has been too tolerant to our adversaries in terms of nation states, but also the immigration issue is vital, because if we don't get that right, and if this situation continues where there's people coming into the country, and I'm not just talking about the crossings in the channel, I'm talking about people who even come here legally. They may well have the right visas and so on, but if they have a hostile attitude to this country, I think that should be enough to warrant police scrutiny. I really do. We have to wake up to this. I mean, Christine Lee, Birmingham solicitor, she had no criminal record, very respectable middle class woman, she'd won awards. Turned out she was accused of being a Chinese spy. I don't know how that case panned out because it went all silent afterwards, no doubt for national security reasons, but a situation like that, if that was in reverse, you could be absolutely sure there would be a kangaroo trial. A British citizen would be put on Chinese state TV. They'd be forced to confess. I'd like to know, are we taking, I'm not going to say the same approach, but at the very, very least, we need to arrest these people to send out a message, actually, you can't act with impunity. We know what you're up to. But is there the political willpower to do that? I haven't seen it so far from Starmer. I mean, he's not Jeremy Corbyn, but will Keir Starmer stand up to China, put simply? Will he accept that there is activism going on in this country? MPs from across the political divide have been threatened by CCP activists online. I mean, if they take an anti-China position, Alicia Kearns, Tom Tugendhat, they've both been chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. They've certainly can testify to this. Well, a Conservative Prime Minister has to be standing up for his or her MPs. And if I were Sunak, I'd be, or the Foreign Secretary, if I were David Cameron, I'd summon the Chinese ambassador to explain this. David Cameron I do not trust when it comes to China because his track record is soft. It's appeasement. We'll see if Starmer's government is any better. I really hope it is, because this is a very, very important issue. And I'll wrap this up. Thanks for watching.